Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Debrief on ABC News Live. I'm Kimberly Brooks. Thanks so much for joining us. Today marks the beginning of the United Nations General Assembly, so we'll have the latest there, plus updates on that whistleblower allegation, President Trump making an admission, and the 71st Primetime Emmy Awards. We're going to give you a recap, but first, here are your headlines.
150,000 British citizens are stuck in other countries after British tour company Thomas Cook collapsed over the weekend.
I suspect that the lenders could have been a little more helpful in terms of some of the covenants and the requirements for capital, and it's a great shame that such an old British company has gone into administration, and I hope it can be rescued.
The British government is going to foot the bill to get those people home. The trial starts this morning for a Dallas police officer accused in a deadly shooting.
A white female police officer shooting to death an unarmed black man in his own apartment a year ago leads to opening statements in Dallas. Amber Geiger's trial for the killing of Botham Jean remains cloaked in mystery, with circumstances that can only be described as very unique. Others place it in a pattern of white officers killing black men.
According to the arrest warrant, Geiger had just finished a 13-hour shift and says she mistakenly parked on the wrong floor, walked down the wrong hall, and went into the wrong apartment. While still in uniform, court documents show the door was slightly open when Geiger arrived, and she opened fire when Jean disobeyed her commands. Legal experts say a murder conviction will be difficult because a decision will likely hang on whether the jury believes the shooting was a reasonable mistake. Rescue crews in Oregon literally throwing a lifeline to a deer. It was trapped in a 25-foot deep water treatment tank near Portland. That deer was in the only spot where it was above water. Crews were able to coax it into walking up a ladder there to freedom.
We begin with a big week in Midtown New York. The United Nations General Assembly is kicking off today. It's the 74th session where 193 nations get to express their opinions and offer suggestions for the biggest issues of the world. And it begins with the United Nations Climate Change Summit, putting the climate emergency on center stage. So I want to go to Connor Finnegan, who's right there at the UN. Connor, you know, what's happening today specifically?
Well, Kimberly, this is a historic week at the United Nations, and not just because it's the General Assembly once again this year, but because of that climate summit. Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, convening the world's leaders to talk about what he says is such an urgent, critical issue. And he's really pressing them to begin to double down on their commitments to address climate change. So he's got French President Emmanuel Macron, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, climate activist Greta Thunberg, among many other speakers today. Who is noticeably absent from his list of speakers, however, is President Trump. He actually just entered the hall a moment ago to listen to some of the speakers, but he will not be addressing the body. Instead, the president, who famously pulled the United States out of the Paris Climate Accord and has really denied the science behind climate change, will be speaking at his own event. The U.S. is hosting a summit on religious freedom instead, which President Trump is expected to say is one of his highest foreign policy priorities. That's really been taken as a snub by many of these world leaders who, according to one diplomatic source I spoke to not too long ago, said they've really given up on trying to convince him of the science behind climate change. Hanging over this whole week as well, of course, is that Iranian attack on a Saudi oil facility. The U.S. says that they will make that a top priority, trying to convince the world body to address that attack, to support Saudi Arabia, and really try to penalize Iran for what they say was an attack that Iran conducted itself from its territory on Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, and Connor, will people be looking out to see if the president has any interactions with some of these leaders that he's embroiled in conflict with?
Yeah, that's right. We'll be following his meeting, especially with Ukrainian President Zelensky, who is newly in office and embroiled in this controversy now about his phone call with President Trump. Whether or not that was the call that prompted an investigation by the Inspector General of the Intelligence Committee in the U.S. President Trump is expected to meet him on Wednesday in addition to several other leaders today, some of whom the president has a close relationship with, but are really seen as bad actors, including, Egyptian President al-Sisi, who is overseeing a crackdown and seen protests in recent weeks against his increasingly autocratic rule. He'll also be meeting with some important U.S. allies, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, South Korean President Moon, as they really try to shore up the U.S.'s efforts to denuclearize North Korea.
All right, Connor Finnegan, right there at the UN with the latest. Thank you so much for joining us today. And he mentioned the president, and speaking of the president, an unbelievable admission where he acknowledged that he talked to the Ukrainian president about Joe Biden's son. So he spoke about this morning on his way into the UN. So take a listen.
We had a perfect phone call with the president of Ukraine. Everybody knows it. It's just a Democrat witch hunt. Here we go again. They failed with Russia. They failed with recession. They failed with everything. And now they're bringing this up. The one who's got the problem is Biden. Because you look at what Biden did. Biden did what they would like to have me do, except for one problem. I didn't do it. What Biden did is a disgrace. What his son did is a disgrace. The son took money from Ukraine. The son took money from China. So let me just tell you, what Biden did was wrong.
All right, so I want to bring in Karen Travers at the White House. Karen, I just want to ask you, this call was a part of the whistleblower's complaint last week. Did the president misuse his office for political gain? I think that's the question.
Yeah, the question is what happened on that call? The president insists he did not put any pressure on the president of Ukraine, but there are a lot of questions swirling here. And this call and that whistleblower complaint are at the center of what is now going to be a very explosive showdown between the Trump administration and House Democrats. You heard the president there say that this was a perfect phone call and tried to push the focus onto former Vice President Joe Biden and his son. This is kind of the classic playbook for the president to deflect attention and try and muddy the waters up and confuse things on something that does seem pretty simple. The president had a phone call in July with the president of Ukraine. The Wall Street Journal first reported that he multiple times tried to put pressure on that leader to investigate the former vice president and his son. And now the question is, was there a quid pro quo there? At the time of that call, there was $250 million in aid to Ukraine that the administration was withholding, despite it being approved by Congress. Congress now wants to get answers on this, and there's going to be a big fight over what the administration turns over to House Democrats, if anything at all.
Yeah, and Karen, what does this mean, given how the Mueller probe went down?
Well, I think you're going to see the president say this is Mueller Part 2, that this is now, as you heard him call it, the Ukraine witch hunt, and that this is all just partisan politics. I think one thing I heard from radio stations today, ABC News radio stations, is that this is a little bit more clear for people to understand than the Russia investigation and everything that was happening in 2016, which was really confusing. This involves the president directly. This is the president, as the sitting president, having a phone call with a world leader, talking about a potential political rival, the person who's leading in all of the polls to run against President Trump next year. And then the question, though, that has to be answered, was there any push on that leader to investigate Joe Biden, and what did the president offer or not offer in exchange for that? That's what Democrats say they have to get to the root of here.
All right, Karen Travers at the White House, thank you so much for the updates. And as she said, there's mounting pressure on the Democrats, specifically to impeach the president. So I want to go to Mary Bruce on Capitol Hill with the latest there. Mary?
Well, Kimberly, there is a lot of frustration here on Capitol Hill, and we are seeing a real shift when it comes to the question of impeachment. Even Democrats who so far have been reluctant to go down this path now are saying that we may be at a tipping point, that the House may have no other option but to consider impeachment. Chairman Schiff of the House Intelligence Committee is now saying that the president's latest actions, that these revelations may be so incriminating that the House may simply have no other option. He says they may have, quote, crossed a Rubicon. Now, the Speaker of the House has set this deadline, giving the Trump administration until Thursday to turn over this whistleblower complaint. Now, Nancy Pelosi, in a letter, notably did not mention the word impeachment, but she certainly is hinting at that possibility. The question is, what happens if they don't get the information that they're looking for on Thursday? Well, Democrats are making it very clear they want this whistleblower complaint, and they're going to use every bit of leverage and tool that they have available to get it. That includes possibly fighting this out in court or using their powers of the purse. The problem here is that all of these plan Bs, even if they do issue a subpoena to try and get the complaint or the transcript of the president's phone call with this foreign leader. Well, all of that could be very slow moving, and that could only add to what we are seeing here on the Hill, which is a lot of frustration, even from Democrats who are frustrated with their own party's muddled response on the question of impeachment and their refusal so far to go after the president in this manner. Kimberly.
All right, Mary Bruce right there on Capitol Hill. And speaking of the Democrats, we're going to check in on the 2020 race. A new frontrunner, Senator Elizabeth Warren, leading polls in Iowa. Numbers from the Des Moines Register and CNN say she is right ahead of former Vice President Joe Biden. So I want to bring in Cheyenne Hazlitt with the details. Cheyenne, what do you think accounts for this new lead?
Well, you know, it's impossible to know for sure, especially this early on, but I can tell you that I listened in on some training sessions at the Steak Fry this weekend. They were sending their volunteers out into the mix with all of the likely caucus goers who were attending the Steak Fry, and they were telling the volunteers, the campaign was telling the volunteers to focus on the little things, to talk about personal stories whenever they can. If they were passionate about climate change and they wanted to talk about Warren's climate change plan, to wrap that in with a personal trip they had taken to the national parks. Things along those lines. So you can tell it's a heavily grassroots-focused campaign. They do things like build community gardens in Iowa. They've beefed up their staffing there. They have a large and well-organized campaign and team there. So I think that we can start with that. But of course, yeah, it is impossible to know for sure what the secret sauce is or how long it would last.
And have you talked to her base? Have you heard anything from the Warren base?
Yeah, well, we actually got a question to Warren herself. Sasha Pezenik out in Detroit with Warren asked her for reaction to these polls, to this poll, actually. And as we have heard from her in the past, she says it's too early. And so, you know, she's focused, she said, on every voter in Iowa. But we'll take a listen to what she says now.
I don't do polls. We are still months away from the Iowa caucuses and the first primary elections. What this is about a message that we are sick and tired of an America that works for a thinner and thinner slice at the top and isn't working for anyone else. We are on this picket line today to say that we're going to make this America work for everyone. That's why we're here.
So you heard her say that she thinks it's still too early for polls. And the poll that the Des Moines Register and CNN released this weekend shows that almost two-thirds of likely caucus goers say that they are undecided, and only 1 in 5 say that they feel like they've made a decision. So it's true that we're early here, and so whether or not this lead reflects where we are in November 2020, before the primaries, is impossible to know.
And just before we go, so Elizabeth Warren's number 1, former Vice President Joe Biden's number 2, and where does Bernie Sanders fall in all of this?
You know, he is in a distant third there, and over the weekend at the Steak Fry, ABC's Rachel Scott asked Sanders what he thought about that, and Sanders has always maintained, as has Warren, that they have a good friendship going, and he said that the poll that we saw out of the Des Moines Register and CNN is not what his campaign is showing, and he still maintains that he will win Iowa. And Sanders, of course, did come fairly close in 2016 against Hillary Clinton.
All right, we will keep everyone updated. Cheyenne Hazlitt in our D.C. Bureau, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And guys, as you know, there have been a lot of devastating storms this hurricane season, and now some new tropical storms moving over the Caribbean that could bring lots of rain to Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. So our Ginger Z has the latest there. Ginger?
Kimberly, thanks. Let's go ahead and start with the forecast for the tropics, because we've got Tropical Storm Karen, of all of the activity, Jerry and that tropical depression, that we want to start with, because the next 24 hours is when it could start to get hairy for parts of the U.S. Virgin Islands or Puerto Rico and Vieques. But look at how the track kind of goes, and it looks like it's trying to curve toward the United States. We've got time. Both computer models, the two that we really look at, are not agreeing at this point. So time to have this thing, you know, be sussed out, and we'll give you that information as we get closer. But until then, if you have interest in Puerto Rico or St. Croix, St. Thomas, all under tropical storm warnings, you could easily see gusts above 40 miles per hour. And on top of that, the main impact is going to be rain. Heavy rain on the order of 2 to 6 inches. You say, well, that doesn't seem like a lot for a tropical island. And if you're flat, it doesn't seem like that much. But if you have any elevation like Puerto Rico does, then you can easily see flash flooding. It doesn't take more than an inch or two. So you could certainly see that with mudslides to boot. Tropical Storm Jerry then, this one kind of taking a similar track to last week's hurricane, but much weaker. That's good news. Tropical Storm watch is up for Bermuda. Remember, they had gusts up to 115 with that storm last week. This time should be at best 60, but it looks like it's even a little bit farther north at this point. Either way, you could see rain and high surf for sure, so keeping an eye on that for Bermuda. And then we got to go to the Pacific because there's a lot of activity out there too. Los Cabos, Mexico, after Lorena passed through, flash flooding, and now Lorena not much at all except for just a bunch of moisture, but it is pooling over Arizona, and that's why we've got flash flood watches in place from New Mexico back through much of Arizona, which, by the way, a majority of the state is in drought. We could see strong winds with this, though. Some of these storms could become, strong enough to bring even some small hail or a few tornadoes. So we're keeping an eye on that today. And then we thought, why not leave you this from Killington, Vermont? Because today is the first official day of fall. It started way earlier this morning, even though we certainly won't feel like it here in New York City, Kimberly, but I am not complaining. Don't tell anybody. Fall started.
Thank you, Ginger. The beautiful, beautiful scenery there. All right, guys, and we move to the NFL, where embattled free agent wide receiver Antonio Brown took to Twitter over the weekend to say he won't play in the NFL anymore. This comes after he was released from the New England Patriots amid charges of sexual assault from his former trainer, Brittany Taylor. So I want to bring in ESPN's Mike Tannenbaum to discuss this. Mike, good to see you. You know, he made a lot of references to other players like Ben Roethlisberger and even the Patriots owner, Robert Kraft. He was trying to show double standards and hypocrisy.
Well, it's interesting. He might have a point on that. However, Ben Roethlisberger was suspended earlier in his career for actions that weren't even criminal in nature. And as it relates to Mr. Kraft of the New England Patriots, no action has taken place yet. So we'll see what happens with that case. So in Roethlisberger's case, he was held accountable for his actions. So Antonio Brown may have a point, but we don't have all the facts yet on that.
So how are these player guarantees and these contracts supposed to work? Because guarantee sounds like you're supposed to get your money.
Right, but there are a couple of provisions, and I'm sure these are some of the arguments that the New England Patriots will make in front of an arbitrator in terms of not paying the signing bonus, as well as the Oakland Raiders not paying the guaranteed money in Antonio Brown's contract. First of all, if there's conduct detrimental, in the view of the arbitrator, was Antonio Brown's conduct, albeit not criminal, detrimental to the league? Alternatively, either the Raiders or the Patriots may argue that did Brown's behavior materially undermine the public's respect for the game. So those will be the arguments that both the Patriots and the Raiders will make, and it will be up to the arbitrator to determine if Brown's actions led to that standard, and if it did, if it met that standard, then that will void the guarantees.
All right, so what happens to his career now? He says he's finished, but, you know, sometimes people come back and change their mind. If a team would accept him later, who knows?
That's right. He's a free agent. There's an investigation going on by the league office right now. He could, as Ben Roethlisberger did, be suspended even without criminal sanctions against him. Once he serves his suspensions, I would not be surprised if he did sign with the team maybe later on this season. Arguably, he's one of the 2 or 3 best receivers in our game. And our game has shown that there is forgiveness. Reuben Foster went through some domestic violence issues with the 49ers. He went to the Redskins, is a recent example. So I wouldn't be surprised if, after a suspension was served, that Antonio Brown did play later on this season.
And before we go, what is the latest on these charges of sexual assault? When does this begin?
So the investigation is ongoing. The league has already talked to a couple of the accusers. There's more than one. And the league is very thorough in these situations. They want to talk to everybody involved, including Antonio Brown. And once they get that information, they will want to rule quickly. The union will want this to be resolved. Antonio Brown and the 30 other teams besides the Raiders and the Patriots will want this to be resolved as well, because they'll want to know, is he eligible to play? And if he is or isn't, when would he be?
All right, Mike Tannenbaum at the ESPN headquarters, thank you so much for giving us the updates. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes, and guys, we move overseas to check in on the royals. Prince Harry and Meghan and baby Archie making their first official tour as a family in South Africa. And our Maggie Rulli is right there on the ground in Cape Town. Maggie, good to see you. How is the family's first trip going?
How's it going?
How's it going?
Oh my gosh, it's incredible. This is perfect timing, Kimberly, because they're actually behind us right now. If you can kind of peek through this mob of people, and the tour officially kicked off just this morning, but they got right to work. This is their second event, and everywhere we go, it seems like the streets are just lined with people. This is the public's one of their best chances to catch a glimpse. So they're back there somewhere. We heard screams earlier. We're trying to get a peek of them myself. They're here today, like I said, the second event. We're just outside the District 6 Museum. District 6 is just to our right, and this was a place, Kimberly, that a couple decades ago, under the apartheid, there were tens of thousands of people that were forcibly removed. So in the middle of kind of all of this party, there's a somewhat heavy backdrop, and that backdrop of race is something we've been seeing throughout the trip, really. They were in a township earlier today, and Meghan gave a speech. Both Harry and Meghan gave speeches, but Meghan in particular had some really powerful, powerful words that are making headlines, and I just wanted to take a listen to them real quick.
While I'm here with my husband as a member of the royal family, I want you to know that for me, I am here with you as a mother, as a wife, as a woman of color, and as your sister.
Yeah. And Kimberly, that is the woman you just heard speaking right here to my right here. If you can peek through, Harry and Meghan Markle are walking down the street right now. You see Harry, Meghan, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex should be walking right past us in just a second. Kimberly, woo! Oh, I got my wave in. I got my wave in. I waved. This hand waved to Harry and Meghan. You're welcome, everybody. Right there. Part of history. Part of history. I'm on the flutter. Okay, but you can see the excitement. It is absolutely unbelievable here. And something that's been amazing here in Cape Town is that people are so excited to see them. One, because they're royalty, but two, people here love Harry and Meghan. It's been really amazing to witness.
Maggie, that was a moment. I am so happy for you. I felt the chills from that moment. That was awesome.
Did you feel it? You felt it?
I felt it. So good to see you. Thank you so much. Enjoy yourself. That's awesome. Good to see you.
Thanks. See you, Kimberly.
Oh, man. That was amazing. I felt that, too. Did you guys? Okay, so we're moving on. Did you watch last night the 71st Primetime Emmy Awards? No host, but still lots of great moments and surprises. Yeah. And we have Mike Muse here to give us the recap.
It's hard to compete with Maggie coming out of that one.
Right?
Though. Yeah. Cheers to Maggie for that
Cheers
one.
To Maggie,
yeah,
right?
I'm really happy for Maggie.
Okay, so just to start, the Emmys had no host. What did you think about that? Good or bad?
You know, I'm not mad at it because the reason why is I like the gentleman who was the side commentators and the voiceovers. I thought he was hilarious. I thought he was extremely petty. He had a lot of shady moments.
Right.
And I thought that he kept it edgy.
Yes.
And I thought that he could do that and kind of get away with it because we couldn't see him all the time, right? And so, but I thought the way that Fox did it was absolutely perfect with him being commentary. I actually want him more.
Really?
Yeah, there was something about that side commentary that he was doing that was completely hilarious. And I think his thought process was that, well, they can't see me, so I can just say anything.
Yes.
And I felt like he was saying anything, right?
Totally.
But it made it really funny.
Absolutely.
So I think they need to bring him back. And I think more awards will need to do that. Comedians who are a little bit shady, a little bit petty, right?
Petty is the word.
Petty.
Petty is the word.
Very petty. Some people may be offended by it, but I enjoyed it.
I think there are mixed reviews, but I think generally people enjoyed it.
Yeah. Because you have to break up the monotony. I think the Emmys versus like other award shows is so much longer because you have to get through so many different categories, right? Like it's a lot to get through. So you don't have time to do a lot of performances and a lot of special interludes. So I think you need something like that.
Absolutely. So before we get to the moments on the stage, I want to ask you who you thought had the best red carpet look.
Yo, hands down Zendaya.
Yes.
Like she killed it.
Killed it.
Like I was like, wait, who is this? Right? I'm like Googling, I already know who it is, right?
Yes.
One Euphoria is one of my favorite shows, but she looked simply amazing.
Right
she
there.
has completely come into like her womanhood right now. And what I find interesting is these child actors, when they transition from a child actor to like a grown adult, it's a really really difficult position. But I think she strategically has been doing great roles. And what people fail to realize, really putting emphasis like on style and how fashion can really transform and really send a statement to you. Absolutely. I mean, we really seen it recently. It was Jennifer Lopez in the Versace fashion show, the throwback to that green dress she wore. I think Zendaya's moment last night is going to be one of those moments that we remember, that really brought her into like her adulthood. They're like, oh, she's an adult actor now, right? No more high school roles. So Euphoria, her last season.
Totally. And she can really do any look. She can be androgynous. She can be sexy like she was, just graceful. She can do anything she puts on.
And I think I like how you said that, sexy. We've never seen her sexy, right? But I think now she's like beyond the age of that, because she's a grown woman.
She's a grown woman.
You know what I mean? But we've never seen her as that.
Totally.
And I think she let us know yesterday, like, no, I'm grown.
Yes.
Yeah.
So speaking of top moments of the night, what did you think? I mean, we have to talk about Billy Porter.
I mean, my gosh. Are we talking about him or the hat? Like, which one do we talk about first? You take your pick.
There were two moments.
Anchor's choice.
The hat. Let's talk about the hat.
The hat was unbelievable. I swear to God, this man can do, speaking of fashion, this man can do no wrong with fashion choices. The hat needed an Emmy. Like, literally an Emmy. I felt bad for whoever sitting behind him, though, right? I would be completely annoyed by that.
They missed the show.
But he always gives us moments with these hats, man. But his speech was absolutely fantastic. How he invoked James Baldwin, I thought was absolutely beautiful.
First openly gay black winner in this category, Best Actor.
Exactly. And what he talked about, he said, James Baldwin did a quote like, every day I want to vomit, right? In terms of the filth that people make me feel. And I think sometimes that is the beauty of award shows, is you get those incredible social constructs. So I just can imagine like a young kid, a young boy sitting somewhere like in Iowa, right? Witnessing this and saying, you know what, I am valid, I am whole, right? And I think when you get a chance to see people like that on the stage, it kind of reflects yourself, it resembles who you are, and it affirms who you are. And I thought that was absolutely brilliant.
And representation, Jarrell Jerome, Afro-Latino, Dominican. This is Hispanic Heritage Month, so got to give him a shout out. That was a moment. That one gave me chills.
It absolutely did. His speech was fantastic. I love his performance, and When They See Us was absolutely amazing. His speech was really well measured. You can feel the moment that he felt, the responsibility, and how he was a custodian of Corey Wise. I love how he gave deference and called him king when it came to that. I thought his speech was it actually brought chills to me listening to him talk, and the fact that he's one of the youngest to receive an Emmy. I think he's one of the second youngest persons to ever receive an Emmy in Emmy history. And I loved how you said the Latinx and Afro-Latino. That's a whole other conversation that we need to be having in America, is Afro-Latina. Like, and what does that look like? Afro-Latino, I'm sorry, in the case of Jerome. And what does that look like? I love how he says, I think, thank you in Spanish, right? I love how he invoked that. And I think that he represented so much in such a little time that was so impactful. That's enough for us to unpack about that.
And then just to see the exonerated five in the row standing up and having that moment on this national stage. I mean, they deserve it.
And I think that's what film can do. Film can really bring forth social justice. I think film can really carry these narratives. And just think about it, as a result of what Ava DuVernay did in showcasing this with this project, she was able to showcase the injustice that these gentlemen receive while receiving their vindication because of the film that she did. And we saw the prosecutors removed from different boards, from the professorships, and the whole nine.
Unbelievable. Mike
so
Muse.
Like, I mean, she got snubbed, though.
I know, but he got something.
I mean, he got something.
When They See Us.
I never ran out of time, but Amelia Clark snubbed. How did she not get anything?
We could talk the whole day about this. We could talk the whole day. That's okay. I understand. Yes.
Sorry, guys, in the control room. I'm a shut
up. Continue to take care of yourselves, and if you're around, you can stick around for the briefing room at 3:30 p.m. Then check out World News Prime at 8 p.m. And if you want to stay updated on all of these headlines, you can go to abcnews.com or download the app. Right, Mike?
Yes. Immediately.
All right. We'll see you tomorrow. Too much fun.
ABC News, straightforward.
Doctors, potatoes. Ismail? David.